Okay, hello everybody. Welcome into this episode of Unwritten. A very special, I say this every time, but this is actually, the other ones are special, but this is going to be a little bit different this week because we have something a little different in mind. My name is Colin McGuire. My co-host, Jess. How are you, Jess?
I'm good, Colin. How are you?
And you always good. You always say good, so you must be living a good life.
I try.
That's good. That's good. And we have our very special guest, Kelsie. We work with Kelsie, and a little known fact for those updating the Unwritten Wikipedia page, Kelsie designed the logo for this worldwide sensation hit of an internet Zoom meeting. So thank you, Kelsie, for that.
No problem.
So we wanted to have you on to talk about this trial, of course, and everything that goes along with it. Actually, Jess, do you want to kind of map this out? This was your idea.
Yeah, so we want to have Kels on because not only is she my dear friend and our editor, but she's been our crime and courts reporter. How long now, Kels?
It's 2017.
Yeah, so you've been here since the beginning of the McCauley trial, and I'm sure most of our viewers and readers and listeners know, but that's kind of the case of the century for us. I mean, we in the office last week have been gathered around the computer like we were watching the OJ trial. So we just wanted to have Kelsie on and kind of discuss what this has been like, because it's a groundbreaking case here lately in our county or our coverage area. I guess I wanted to start with Kelsie. You were there the entire week and a few days. What were the emotions like in the courtroom?
Oh goodness, I don't even know if I could put it into words. You can tell that the police, obviously it was emotional for the family, but you can also tell for the police and the prosecutors and everyone who's been involved since day one, how emotional it was. And to describe the emotions on everyone's face when those guilty verdicts came back, it's just hard to explain. From the prosecuting attorneys, the police, Riley's father, mother. The one person that didn't show any emotion, however, was Andy McCauley once the verdicts were read. So I don't know, I'll let our readers decide what they think about that. But the police said that was very, very telling. And the one officer also said when he was testifying, he watched McCauley continue to show no emotion. So both ends of the spectrum there.
You mentioned the father, and the whole week was a lot of emotional testimony, but his testimony when it came to mercy versus no mercy, I mean, I teared up during it. You as a new parent, did you tear up during it?
Absolutely. I mean, how crazy is it that, he said, why would you give this man mercy after 15 years when all my daughter had to live was 15 years? And I think that hit home to everyone there. And like you said, as a new mom, I couldn't imagine.
Well, let's back up a little for those who might not know what happened. Take us to the beginning of what was the trial about? Obviously, there's murder involved because from what you guys have said, just for if there was an alien to drop down and see this episode, take us back to the beginning.
Okay, so it would have been on March 7th of 2019. It started as a normal day for the family. Riley was described as a self-starter where she'd get herself up, ready for school, say bye to her mom and head off to hang out with her friends. And then it was on May 8th of 2019, same normal morning for the family. However, Riley didn't come home from school that day. Her family were kind of concerned, but at the same time, she had a lot of after school activities. So they thought maybe she was at the school. So they started looking for her at the school. And it wasn't until 6 p.m. that Morgan County Schools called her mom and said that she wasn't even at school that day. Since then, Morgan County's actually changed their policy, and now they call, after first period if they miss class. Fast forward to May 15th of 2019, Riley's still missing. They brought in a cadaver dog who alerted on the the truck bed. Let's see. And then throughout those, days leading up to May 15th, everybody's stories that they talked to, all the witnesses, family, friends, all their stories added up except for Andy McCauley's. So police told me after the trial that it was about day 2 that he became the prime person of interest. Now, like the prosecutor also explained to me, it's not typical CSI, the white van that snatches up a girl on the side of the road. It's usually someone close to the family. Come to find out through all these lies from Andy McCauley, they eventually use video surveillance to spot his truck. He said he went to his home on May 8th to get some drugs. However, his previous story was that he got it up from somewhere else. He was trying to distance himself from the home. Now, police that once he returned to the home is when he took Riley's body in the truck and he drove to Tuscarora, found Riley's body on May 16th, 2019. By DNR officers who found her. Testimony for surveillance video, seeing him drive to the house, but not back from the house. They looked in other directions, and that's when they found his truck driving on Tuscarora Pike, where Riley's body was eventually found. And so then, he was arrested, and that's about it. That's the gist.
We should add that Andy was Chantal Oakley's boyfriend at the time, Riley's brother being Chantal Oakley, and he lived with him about 1.5 years at that point, if I remember from the trial right.
Right. That's where the child death by child abuse by person in position of trust or her custodian. The defense tried to argue that, he had no custodial rights over her. However, the law specifically states that it doesn't have to be legal, just that she's in his care, custody, or control for any length period of time, which the state did prove that if the grandmother wasn't there or the mother wasn't there, that Andy did watch her and her siblings.
Was this, when this story began to unfold, was it yours from the beginning? Were you reporting on it from the very beginning?
Yes. At first, when it was reported as a missing case, sometimes that happens and the teens show up within a couple hours. They had a fight with their mom, fight with their dad. But in this case, the police quickly learned that wasn't the case. And so, I covered it from that she was just a missing juvenile up to when they believed that she was killed, all the way to the end.
You being in that courtroom the whole week, did you see a piece of evidence that you personally thought was the most damning?
I would have to say the most damning probably would have been the cell phone records. That proved, big holes and lies in his story. He said he was at, he'd be at one place in his story and then they'd use the phone records to find out that he wasn't there. He also tried to contact an old boss who he had a bad ending with. And it had been at least 6 months since they had spoken, yet Andy was calling him 303, 308, called him 12 times at 3:00 in the morning. And, police believe that was because he was trying to get a truck to dispose of her body. Also, phone records, showed, her text her boyfriend, Andy's in my room, I'm scared. There's just so many things to name that they use those phone records for, to put the pieces of the story together. I think it's important to understand that in a case like this, you don't have to have direct evidence. You don't have to have the DNA, things like that. You can have all these circumstances that tell the story, and that's what we had here in this case.
I'm gonna jump in real quick and say I couldn't agree more, because I have a handy dandy notebook full of the timeline, going through all your stories to make sure I had it straight.
Right.
There's
a lot of time.
Go ahead, Kels.
I was saying there's a lot of times involved from, I guess, the other real damning evidence would be the surveillance videos. And that's what really hits home about this case for me too. It's, they use surveillance from Hedgesville High School. That's where I graduated. They used Murphy's gas station, obviously get gas there often. They used all these surveillance videos tracking him to his home, where when he eventually said, yes, I did go home after story 3, he said he took the same way home. We find out later that they continued to watch the surveillance videos into the afternoon, and he didn't return home that way. He returned home from Tuscarora Pike, and then they show him exit 13 for people who are familiar with the area at the Rocks gas station. There you see him throwing something away from the bed of the truck where they say that Riley's body was. So between the phone records and the surveillance video, couldn't argue that.
Now this kind of goes to Jess. You were on staff at the time, right, Jess?
I was on the sports staff when I started. The only real involvement I had was covering a pretrial, ironically with the cadaver dog when Kelsie was on maternity leave.
But when all this was happening, even though you were on the sports desk, did this catch your attention too? Was this sort of the talk of everybody?
I mean, we were definitely talking about it at the time. Our former reporter, Bree, was on the staff. Me, Kelsie, Emily, our current reporter, and Bree are all pretty close. We're all a little morbid and death obsessed. So this did catch our attention.
It was, I mean, with you, Kelsie, did you get from early on when you started reporting on it, did this kind of shape up and you thought, this is one of the biggest stories I've ever reported on in this area?
Definitely for Morgan County. You don't see a case like this in Morgan County. It's a very small town, tight-knit community. You definitely don't see this. And so, I mean, it's sad to say, but we get several runaway juvenile cases. And like I said, they come back within, a couple hours. We knew pretty soon that this was different, and it just wasn't another one of those cases. And something unfortunately happened to her, and it just breaks my heart to know she'd be graduating this year from Berkeley Springs High School, and just sad all around.
I think what really showcases how small town it is, how special this case is Sheriff Willis' statements afterwards to you in your post-conviction story, where he said there were so many people coming out immediately after looking for Riley, looking for the body, coming up with ideas of what could have happened. You just don't get that in a normal case.
No, he said around 500-600 people. That's a lot of people rallying together. And it showed that people rallied together throughout the trial as well. On the verdict day, you had several Berkeley Springs High School students that would have been graduating with Riley this year, holding up Justice for Riley signs outside the courtroom, and just remembering the case. Riley's favorite color was purple. They both wore purple to testify. And another thing to show the tight-knit community, Morgan County Prosecuting Attorney Dan James said Riley actually had come to a couple court cases and sat right next to him and was curious about law. So he knew her personally. And then just to see him hug the family after the fact getting justice, the family made sure to hug every police officer, thanking them for helping them get justice. And that was heartwarming to see in a sad situation.
Well, this became a national story, correct?
Yes, it did. They brought in and then Court TV. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it, but they came in to cover it as well. And they've covered cases like the Chauvin case, and they cover all big national stories. And they came out to this one.
What was that like, being in the courtroom and having this sort of circus with the video cameras and the famous people coming? I mean, famous relatively speaking, but you had people from far away come in. Did that create sort of a zoo-like atmosphere?
No, actually, they were all very friendly. It was fun. It was fun to watch them. It's something I've never seen before. That all the different camera angles, watching them. Who they focused on. And it was fun to watch, and they were all very friendly. Would answer any questions we had. They would let us take any of the footage, since not everyone was granted access to bring phones, computers, any recording device. So yeah, they were very helpful. And then, transparency. Everybody got to watch. I know some of the comments on there, people were watching from other states. So yeah.
I know I mentioned our reporter Emily earlier. She was speaking with Sheriff Moore. Her family's from that area, and he had told her that there wasn't a TV in Berkeley Springs that you didn't see the case on, or a computer you didn't see the case on throughout the last week.
Mm-hmm. I mean, despite that, they were still able to form a jury out of Morgan County residents. I know that was a huge concern for the defense. They were afraid that they weren't going to get a fair trial. So they had jurors in Berkeley County and Jefferson County also on standby. But ultimately, there was enough people who weren't completely familiar with the case. Also had some people who just moved into the area and registered to vote here, so they didn't know about the case. So even though it got national attention, they were still able to form a jury. And Morgan County Prosecutor Dan James told me that was important because there was a lot of roads in this case. Jamestown Road, Tower Circle, a bunch of roads that, to put the pieces together, is important for the jury to understand where these places were. And that would have been harder for a jury not picked in Morgan County.
You mentioned the defense. I know we spoke early in the case, and you were saying that the state was projecting this many witnesses, the defense this many. Were you surprised when the second week came and Andy decided not to testify, and there's really no witnesses for the defense at that point?
Actually, from my experience anyway, that's not super uncommon. In my experience, the one time that a defendant did testify, he did try to plead the fifth. It was obviously too late at that point. So actually, it's not very uncommon for defendant not to testify and for them not to call any witnesses. Was I a little surprised? Yes. But you have to separate, social media from their tactics, which you don't really know. There was some, rumors going around that if they called a witness, it could have cleared that up, but they didn't. So I'm not sure what that means, but I was a little surprised, but it's not very uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to a minute ago when you were talking about finding jurors. Do you think there was a serious possibility or serious potential for the trial to be moved anywhere?
I'm remembering back to some of the pretrial hearings. You could tell it was important to keep it where it was. All parties would have done what they had to do. But that's another reason that they did the jury a week ahead of time, just to make sure that they would be able to get a Berkeley or a Morgan County jury. And if not, they still had a week to find jurors from either Berkeley or Jefferson County. They also called 150 jurors, which that's not normal. It's usually 100 or less. So they called more. They anticipated the possibility of needing to use other counties, but I think it was important. And the law says, it should be held in your county if at all possible. The defense did do a survey during the pre-trial, just to see if they believed it was possible. And it turns out it was. They actually, believe it or not, they selected 2 juries in this case. Back in April was supposed to be the first trial. They had the jury selected, and then on day 1 of the trial, a witness was exposed to COVID, and so they had to reschedule it, and that's why it was held in September. So believe it or not, they were actually able to schedule 2 juries in this case. But and then another difference they did was usually just 2 alternates, where they chose 4 alternates, just in case they got into the evidence and they're like, oh, I know that person. And if they had to, excuse themselves, they would have people to fill the spots. But that wasn't, the alternates weren't needed in this case.
You mentioned social media a minute ago, and obviously we're talking about a lot of justice for Riley. We've seen a lot of comments that some feel the justice has been served, some who haven't. Do you personally feel like justice has been served in this case?
I do. Speaking to the officers at the end, the manpower they brought into this case, FBI, Homeland Security, National Exploited Missing Children, Brandy Eggman with the canine officer, no stone was unturned in this case. And, just all that manpower, and the experience, it's just amazing. All the officers coming on the stand, 10, 15, 20 years experience. I do believe justice was served. You always hope it's served. But the 12 peers have spoken, and they all believe the justice was served, and I agree with their decision.
Do you feel, especially as a reporter and an editor and somebody who's been doing this for a while, like, are there more stories to write, do you think, moving forward, or beyond just, let's say, like anniversary pieces, maybe anniversary of the trial or things like that? Are there other things you want to write about?
I think so. You could say this is kind of a case of, domestic violence. You could always take an angle like that. Definitely another story could be, like I mentioned earlier, with Morgan County changing their policy for a case like this. They maybe could have, they might have been able to search for her sooner. If that call would have came in before 6 p.m. because, unfortunately her mom, some things that she seemed weird to her, but it wasn't until that phone call that she really got concerned. So policy change, domestic violence, there's definitely some things that came out of this case.
And we should add, I guess, maybe in defense of Chantal, Riley's mom, she was a single mother per se. Granted, Andy was there as her boyfriend who was working 2 jobs. She wasn't feeling well. So even if things weren't adding up, there was a million things on her mind at that time.
Absolutely. And she's definitely, you've seen it in her testimony and the recorded jail phone, or the recorded call that she had. She's definitely beating herself up. She said, I should have checked on her that morning. I should have done this. Andy, she wasn't your responsibility. Just comments like that. So, she's struggling with it. She also had 2 younger kids she was raising. Like you said, 2 jobs, back to back. Riley was a self-starter. Like she said, she didn't ever have much to worry about. Riley was such a good kid, and it's just sad.
Are there other things that you seem to like covering crime and courts, right? No, maybe, yeah.
That's fair to say, yes.
So with having the ability to cover this, then was this sort of, I don't want to say special, seems to be the wrong word, but one of those things that you probably will never forget is that following this saga over the years, and especially with how it concluded, is this something that'll stick with you?
Absolutely. This may sound silly, but this is the first case that I ever got a copy of jury instructions for. They read them to the jury, you listen to them, but this time I was actually given a copy, and my husband laughed at me because I told him I was going to frame them. Those are important instructions given to a jury that probably, not sways them, but it instructs them on their verdict. And this was a monumental verdict in this case.
I'll never forget the original, or one of the original dates was scheduled right for Kelsey's return from maternity leave. And she strongly considered coming back a week early. She kept telling me, I don't know if I'm going to, McKenna needs me, but I want to come back. You
follow something from the beginning, you definitely want to see it through. especially a big case like this. So yeah, I definitely considered that, but got
You-
lucky and it was
You deserve to
continued.
cover it, and you did a great job as always, Cal.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so then is there anything else coming up on are there any other big cases that you're waiting to see happen? Is there any other sort of bucket list item? I mean, it's kind of a morbid question to ask because you don't want to say, I want to cover a, super homicide or something, but are there things that you would love to cover moving forward?
There's some more big cases coming up. I always look at it as, these families are trying to get their justice. They're sad, but this is days that these families have been waiting for. Just like this case, for example, 2019 is when this happened, and it wasn't until 2021 that they were able to get justice. And that's what makes these cases rewarding to follow, is to see the justice at the end, see the families get a little bit of closure, even just a little bit. So with that said, we have another case coming up that just got rescheduled for February. However, these two Hagerstown, Maryland men were alleged to have shot a Taylor Hawkridge outside of her home. And this case was back in 2014. So this family has been waiting even longer for justice. So hopefully they're able to get that here in February. That's probably one of the biggest ones coming up. We also have another one where the defendant is alleged to have shot his stepfather. Currently that one is pending a psych evaluation. So we'll see where that one takes us as well.
Well, Jess, do you have anything else? What bases did we not cover?
I don't think there's any, Kels, is there anything that you think that should be said that hasn't been said? I feel like it's been covered to death, but it deserved to be covered in that manner.
Yeah, you get the final word. The final word on all of this goes to you, Kelsie. So make it good.
No pressure. We pretty much covered it. I'm just grateful that the officers and the prosecutor took time to speak with us following this case. So much emotion. They probably wanted to go out and celebrate a little bit, but I appreciate them for taking their time, talking through some more of the case, why they were so confident that Andy was their guy. And, I just appreciate the hospitality that we were given to cover the case. And I think we covered it.
I think we should say, just ending too, that we are sorry for the loss of Riley, that's such a terrible, tragic incident.
Yeah, my heart definitely goes out to her family, and I hope they have some sort of closure and they can remember the good things about Riley. She was described as kind, gentle, loving soul, and definitely a person this world's gonna miss. So my heart goes out to her family and friends.
Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on, Kelsie. It's a nighttime taping. We don't do these a lot. I'm sure you're very busy. Jess is very busy. The world is very busy, I suppose. But we really appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll have you on again, and maybe the next time we'll talk about something happier, like your favorite ice cream or something.
That sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Kelsie. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Have a good night.